The year is 1999. Fred Durst and arm farts are running rampant. And a little guy named Tony Hawk also seems to be a pretty big deal at the time. And when he's not out landing bolts or shredding aerials, he's actually influencing the 90s and early 2000s era of gaming in a massive way. With its humble yet impressive beginnings, underrated cult classics, a handful of blunders, and everything in between, I just so happen to have played and ranked every single title in the franchise. And per usual, one game will reign supreme at the S+ ranking, and another, the F- ranking, be deemed the worst in the series. Go ahead and comment your favorite and least favorite Tony Hawk game as we get started. Starting us off, we have the legendary and original Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Pretty bare bones game. You choose your character and simply go through somewhat linear levels, completing very simple tasks in a 2-minute time limit. Each level gets more difficult the further you get into the game, and then you also have the competition levels where you just have to, score a high score to move on to the next level after that. And this would be the format for the foreseeable future in the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. Outside of this, you have Free Skate, which you would see in every title to follow as well. It's pretty self-explanatory. You just choose a level and freestyle. It's actually a really good way to get better at the game, or better yet, learn the game in the first place. Because these first two games, honestly, are kind of just leave you out to dry. You really just have to learn for yourself. The tutorial isn't exactly super in-depth. Basically, there's a lot of hidden stuff about this game that the game doesn't necessarily tell you up front. Surprisingly, for almost a 30-year-old game, this game has aged pretty well. Graphically speaking is one thing, I don't really knock it for that. This game looks fine for a PlayStation 1 title. The controls are honestly what really impressed me. I didn't really have much to complain about. Obviously, if this was if a game came out modern day like this, it would be unacceptable, but it's really easy to go back to. As far as content goes, this does have to be the title with the least amount, which really isn't saying much, because one, this is the first installment of the franchise, so you can't really expect too much from it, and two, Tony Hawk games in general just have a ton of content to begin with, so in comparison, yeah, this one's not going to have as much, but every game moving forward is just going to be jam-packed. And as far as the gameplay, there's not as many avenues for tricks and combos as its successors, but still enough to give you a taste of the Tony Hawk games and ease your way into more advanced titles. The original Pro Skater gets a B tier. I knew when I loaded up Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 and I was immediately greeted by Rage Against the Machine's Guerrilla Radio, I was in for a good time. There actually isn't too much of a change between the two games other than Pro Skater 2 has way more content. I would go as far to say Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 has probably double the amount of content and goals than Pro Skater 1, so that's for sure an improvement. The goals are also much more in depth alongside the levels themselves, and as far as the gameplay, I don't think there's much anything added of how many tricks are available or new elements really at all. Someone wants to correct me on that, you can. I mean, again, I still was playing this game kind of like a button masher at this point. It wasn't really until Pro Skater 3 where I started to evolve as a player. What I do know is this is the first game to go kind of silly with the whole secret skater mechanic, or I guess really just the characters you unlock. They go stupid in this game, and that would be a trend moving forward. Also, you could create your own skater, which wasn't a thing in the original, so that's a nice plus. And on top of being able to create a skater, you can also create your own park, which is pretty nice. I mean, that's just a pretty nice bonus. I mean, again, I just comparing to Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1, a pretty significant jump up in the amount of content here. And when you can create your own stuff, that gives way more replayability than Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1. Back to the whole secret skater stuff. If you 100% this game, you get Spider-Man as a character. And again, each character has their own special tricks. I mean, he's shooting the board with the web and doing all sorts of crazy stuff with it. And, seeing such a big character, even in 1999 or 2000, whenever this game came out, is a pretty big deal. I compare that to today, where yeah, we have fucking Nicki Minaj in Call of Duty and that kind of jank bullshit, but seeing a big character like Spider-Man in any IP today outside of Disney or even I guess Fortnite is just something I would never believe today. And obviously a lot has changed since the year 2000 and 2025, so you can't really expect them to bring back Spider-Man in the remaster, spoiler alert. The idea of jumping through all those hoops of licensing and IP and whatnot moving forward just seems like a nightmare, but I guess in 2000 it really wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, they even gave him 4 different variants. One was the symbiote Spider-Man. I mean, that's just more than you could ever ask for. There's also other funny things, like Officer Dick is Jack Black, and he's also a playable character. I didn't know that until actually after I beat this game, so that was pretty funny. I would describe Pro Skater 2 as at least one tier above Pro Skater 1. Again, not to undermine Pro Skater 1 as a game. There's just more content, more replayability, just a better game. And for that, it gets an A tier. Pro Skater 3 is my first experience with a Tony Hawk game, and it's also the first Tony Hawk game released for PS2. Yet again, same concept here, go through levels, complete goals, win a competition or two, snag some secret skaters and bonus content until you beat the game to death. Pro Skater 3 takes a big jump from Pro Skater 2 in as far as the level design. The levels are much more open and kind of less linear than they were before. Still on that 2-minute timer, but the goals are just a little more objective based, I guess, you're burying bullies and that kind of stuff, whereas before it's just just do tricks or jump on this, whatever it may be. These are also some of my favorite favorite levels in the franchise. Canada, cruise ship, airport, suburbia. These are the levels that I immediately think of when I hear Tony Hawk in general. Also, I didn't know that this game actually had online multiplayer support for the PS2. Not exactly sure what it entailed, but I mean, the fact that console gaming really wasn't a thing at the time and they decided to include it anyways, kind of a cool gesture. Wish I got to experience that, but I know that was like, so doing any type of like online gaming on a console in the year 2001 was more hassle than it was worth. Outside of bigger and better levels, there's one more element to this game that really revolutionized the franchise moving forward, and that's the introduction of the revert. The revert is that little spin move you do when you come off of a half pipe, and then it lets you chain together even more combos moving forward. This makes the game much easier to chain those combos together, and you can just get ridiculous scores this way. And it's kind of one of those things that's like, how did we even exist playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 without this mechanic? So that's definitely worth a out here, and I think makes the gameplay just way more fun than it already was. And this is also the game that felt genuinely difficult. You can say that about any Tony Hawk game in the franchise because there's always a completionist bonus, and those are always pretty hard to begin with. But this is the first game that I feel like made you actually get good at the game and learn the mechanics instead of button mashing. You still kind of had to know what you're doing in the previous two games, but this one there was like no, you would get stuck on a level if you just kind of like tried to free ball it. And in this game, once you 100%ed it, you got Darth Maul on your side. Yeah, that was pretty cool. I mean, you know, Phantom Menace just came out, so pretty big deal, you know, play as Darth Maul with his dual lightsaber in the fucking Tony Hawk game. Who's not gonna love that? I could see why people will call this the best in the franchise because it certainly innovated and added the perfect amount of content to a formula that was already amazing to begin with. I do think there's at least one game that I like more or is better, and this game is still a masterpiece nonetheless, and it gets the first S tier on this video. And as you've noticed so far, I haven't really talked too much about the soundtracks, if any at all. That's because, one, all the Tony Hawk games, even the bad ones, still have at least decent soundtracks. But I only want to shine on Pro Skater 4 for being my personal favorite for music. AC/DC, Sex Pistols, Run DMC, NWA, The Offspring, and my personal favorite, System of a Down, make an appearance, and it's just such a good time. Well, as far as the game itself, I think the biggest change to career mode is the fact that the formula would get a sort of a rework. Instead of being on that 2-minute timer that we had for every single game up until this point, now you have an open world level where you actually have to go to talk to people to activate goals, which some people don't like. They had to kind of like tweak around and find these objectives. But these objectives are way more fun, and they have dedicated timers for themselves, if a timer at all. You kind of get to do it at your own pace, explore the map, you know, just do everything at your own pace whenever you want, wherever you want. And I like that a lot more. It's kind of like the revert. It's like, how did we play the game before this? I think the open world-ish design is much better for the franchise. 2-minute timers felt stressful because some things would be like really tedious. You'd spend all 2 minutes to do one objective that you couldn't just like retry and over. You have to restart the whole entire run. It was just kind of tedious. Then the goals themselves are kind of silly. I mean, like, you save a guy from a shark attack. That's just kind of like ridiculous. Then the infamous sketching the elephant while it's shitting all over you to keep your balance. I mean, that's just skateboard bullshit I like. And once again, as someone who only plays career mode or enjoys career mode the most, I guess, having that timer removed just made the game feel so much more seamless and enjoyable and way less stressful than it was before. Even with the more in-depth goals, they're still not like a super like cohesive story whatsoever. It's still kind of just do random tasks, which is something this game still doesn't have, but we'll see in the next game. But again, I just like this format better. I think it's on par with Pro Skater 3, maybe a little bit better, but I still think there's, again, just one game that's better than both of these. But this game did give us my personal favorite Secret Skater, and that is Jango Fett. You know, Darth Maul was great, and then Attack of the Clones came out and Jango Fett, you know, I mean, it just like, the timing here was just impeccable for pop culture and just Star Wars fans and skateboard fans, I guess, for that matter. When I think of playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater, I think of playing as Jango Fett every single time. You know, you get to like see him shoot his blaster or run his jetpack up and go do some crazy jumps, whatever it may be. Anyways, this is an S tier game just like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. Tony Hawk's Underground was the first non-pro skater Tony Hawk game, but is definitely still a mainline entry for the franchise. Skater culture is definitely sprinkled throughout Tony Hawk games, but Underground is where they really went headfirst into that way of life. The best way to sum up this game is drink the piss and suck the dick.
Suck the dick! Drink the piss!
Now you have full-blown cutscenes and an actual story that's surprisingly compelling and infinitely more engaging than any other installment so far. You get to customize your character, and I always go for the no head or face and go all SpongeBob Scaredy Pants style on them. But yeah, even like playing this game, this made me a little uncomfortable, but when you can do something so yucky and disturbing and like ridiculous as this, you kind of really have no choice. You kind of just got to do this. Also, this game has face mapping. When I saw this, I immediately thought it used the iToy, but it actually used an email address. I guess you'd upload a JPEG of yourself to provide an email, I suppose, and then it would just map it. But I'm sure this is pretty bad, but again, kind of like the PS2 having online multiplayer, this is a pretty cool concept that they even included this. And I guess Underground 2 is a game as well, spoiler, that had the actual support for the iToy, which I'm sure got a little bit better. Again, just a cool little gesture here. Similar to Pro Skater, you're a skater trying to make it, but now you get actual shifts and hurdles in the story. Something that helps this game feel a little bit more than just another Tony Hawk game is the fact that you can get off your board entirely and rock around each level. And this was really nice. There's a lot of times where you need to get to like a really precise location to collect a secret tape, whatever it may be, and then you're just trying to ride there, but you wish you could just get off and walk there, and you end up like falling over. That was pretty annoying, but that's no problem in this game. You can also beat the hell out of people, so that's pretty cool. The levels themselves do feel a little bit more linear, but that's because instead of doing random tasks that feel sort of repetitive, you now have tasks that directly tie to what you're trying to achieve in whatever part of the game you're in. Sneak out of Russia, beat your rival in a skate off, shoot footage for sponsors, and so forth. This made things much more engaging because it didn't feel like I was playing free skate with a little more structure, because objectives were much more relevant now. With more compelling goals, which you could almost argue are full-blown missions now, you have much more memorable ones. Also, randomly, there's full-blown driving segments where you're in a car and, you know, dropping people off or picking them up, doing whatever. I mean, that kind of felt out of place here, but I still enjoyed it. You can even make choices like what sponsor to roll with and what other skaters you want on your team, which I don't think there was any decision-making until this point. As a matter of fact, there's actually like tons of product placement in this game, which there is for a lot of Tony Hawk games, but this was pretty silly when I just was down in New York, I think was the city, and you just see fucking like a full-blown McDonald's. Yo, where the fuck's my chicken wrap? There's also more moves than ever. The goals are the best they've ever been. I actually care about what's going on, and Gene fucking Simmons is here too for the cherry on top. I firmly believe that this is the best Tony Hawk game. Again, I'm just a career mode sucker, and this one just like really went hard in the career mode as a full-blown campaign. And again, you actually give a shit about what's going on instead of just trying to be like the best skater ever with not really any like cohesive story between each level like it was in the previous four games rather. But yeah, this gets the S+ ranking. This is my favorite game in the franchise, and I also think it is the best. Now we're in Underground 2, which takes place directly after Underground 1. Similar concept here in that you have a much more narrative-driven experience, except I think the original Undergrounds was much more interesting. The cast of jackasses here, and that's like the whole vibe here, is that it's just like a demolition tour. And as much as I like watching people shoot themselves in the dick with a paintball gun, this felt a little out of place. I mean, actually, it really didn't feel out of place, but it just felt a little too, you know, suck the dick, drink the piss.
That bubblegum boy band shit, it's gay!
The gameplay here is just really good. Like I said, the game picks up in New Jersey after the events of Underground 1, and you're a skater kidnapped, and then it's revealed that Bam Margera and Tony Hawk are your kidnappers. And I don't know, for whatever reason, but this part of the game with the whole like chainsaw and the hockey mask and the kid screaming and pissing his pants, like, it actually really scared me. I don't know what it was, but I had to like take a break from this game for a couple days before I could give it another try and not get freaked out. I would love to know if someone else had that happen to them. Anyways, they pitched the World Destruction Tour, where Team Bam and Team Hawk set out to go across the world, wreaking havoc in any way possible. And this alone sets the game aside from Underground 1, because your objectives usually rely on vandalism in some way, but also in that it has nothing to do with becoming a better skater, but just kind of mindless nonsense. And in another big way that the format is drastically changed is now with each level, you have your original skater, who's like, you know, your guy you make, who's on Tony Hawk's team. Then you have to find 3 other skaters, which you will unlock for like free skate and whatnot later, and you use them to complete additional objectives. And those objectives are actually locked behind those characters. You have to find them. I don't know. I just wasn't a big fan of this. The characters and also the vehicles, yes, they're like, you know, not everyone has a skateboard. You get pretty outlandish. In like the 3rd level, you get Steve-O, and he has a mechanical bull. Speaking of characters, this game probably has the best lineup for secret skaters. Like, it goes so ridiculous. Ben Franklin, Shrek, Bigfoot, a zombie, and just tons of others. This game kind of feels like if you see an NPC in any given level, you can probably skate as them. But back to the story, where I want to highlight just how outlandish this shit gets, specifically in the New Orleans segment, where you free the voodoo Prince Dark Lord guy as he curses the entire town and turns them into zombies, and then you have to save everyone. I mean, it is just fucking ridiculous. Again, skateboarding vibe, like hit nail on the head here, and that probably is my favorite part of the story. But other than that, I just would rather have a little more traditional of experience. Just a preference thing here again. I have to point out the return of classic mode in this game. Outside of career mode, then you have classic mode, which has tons of old levels and new levels, and it is basically like a full Tony Hawk Pro Skater game, but as a bonus mode basically. And for that, this game gets a huge boost forward. That is just a really nice gesture. As far as, again, we've talked about how the games get more content as they progress, and this game, I think, actually probably has the most content of any Tony Hawk game if you really want to get down to it. Regardless of the career mode not being my favorite, you know, the whole, really, aside from like the narrative itself, the whole switching characters in the middle of levels, that's my biggest problem with it. This is still a great game. I would give it an A tier. I think a lot of people probably give this an S tier or maybe call it the best Tony Hawk game out there. But again, not for me. American Wasteland is the second attempt of a new entry in the Tony Hawk series, and it differs a good bit from any game so far. Still cut from the same cloth as Underground, but definitely a standout game in the franchise. The whole entire game takes place in LA, and there's actually like not really any loading screen between each level, which when you discover that, you kind of get like a little bummed out, but each level or section of Los Angeles feels different enough to where it actually works out very well. The overall objective is all about turning this barren wasteland into a skate park with tons of structures used from around the open world. Like I said, that open world works out really well, and now you can do tricks across the entire map, which obviously gives you so much opportunity to do some crazy ass combos. So that's just like a really nice thing to have in a Tony Hawk game where you want to make these crazy lines work. Completionist content is Tony Hawk's jam, and I think Wasteland showcases that very well. There are tons of objectives to collect for your skate land, and hunting down each and every one doesn't feel too tedious or extremely difficult, but pretty rewarding overall. And if that's not your thing, you still have the classic mode like it was in Underground 2, so you have that traditional pro skater gameplay here. Being able to pimp out your skate park and kind of see it slowly, it literally starts as just a desert and see it slowly get bigger, and then you get to like test each thing as you unlock it is pretty satisfying. There's something for everyone here because then you also have classic mode like I just said. This is another really good game and probably the last like really solid game for the PS2 era, sadly, but this still gets a B tier. American Skateland is a DS and Game Boy exclusive that is a mobile version of American Wasteland. There's plenty of handheld versions of games we've talked about or will talk about, and this is the only one I want to actually highlight. I think the other ones kind of just feel like cheap ports that don't really get the love in TLC that they deserved, or just direct copies of the respected game. But this one's different enough to be its own separate title, and it's also actually like really good for a DS game. Granted, I did play this game on a emulator and I had a PS5 controller, so maybe that helped out a little bit, but regardless, the responsiveness and fluidity of this game really surpassed my expectations. I would go as far to say this game is like probably on par with Pro Skater 3 in controls and responsiveness. It's a shrunk down version of the game, and all the tricks and secrets of any mainline game is still present here, and there's even added features like the bottom screen acting as a map for whatever level you're on, which is something that mainline games still don't have, and I found very helpful. I only played the classic mode, which was very rewarding. You know, you had all sorts of random levels to choose from, and they were all pretty fun, and honestly, like the bar for how much they wanted to get your score up was really high. I mean, like there was like 1 million score for like the pro score in one of these. And just like American Wasteland, which I don't think I mentioned this about American Wasteland, the career mode does a really good job teaching you how to play the game. This is just a hidden gem. I think if I had a DS, this would have been like one of my favorites and probably one of the best DS games out there. This gets a B tier. Tony Hawk's Downhill Jam blurs the line between spin-off and mainline entry. I think it leans much more into spin-off territory, but I think it's technically a mainline game. I don't really know. Taking a much more arcadey and race approach for the franchise, the gimmick here is that each course has a top to bottom, and for the most part, it's seen as how fast you can make it to the bottom, but in different ways. These range from the most common mode being a race, but then there are other objectives like rings, time trials, one-on-one, small objectives like knocking people over, and even causing the most destruction on your way down. I wouldn't call this like a bad video game, but I would call it a bad Tony Hawk game. If you're a returning player for the franchise, you're probably not going to enjoy this, but if you like Mario Kart or something along that vein, like you'll probably have a good time here. You know, it's very, very A to B gameplay. The biggest problem I have with this game is the level design is very stale. You have 6 levels, and each mission in the career mode is like a little segment of that, and you have an objective, and it kind of feels like you just play the same like levels over and over again, just with each different objective, and until you've played all of them. It's very, very repetitive and honestly not very difficult either. You'll play the same level 5 times. One time you're going to just race and try and come in first. Another time you're going to have a time trial. Another time, again, just like those objectives I talked about earlier, you're going to do those for every single level and every single combination of that level, which, spoiler alert, gets pretty old pretty fast. I think playing this with a friend at a sleepover in like 2009 probably could have been pretty fun, but this is 2025 and I am almost 30 years old. It gets pretty old pretty fast. I'm giving this a D tier. Project 8 is another mainline spin-off-esque game that is definitely every bit of forgettable. Definitely not bad per se, but this is about as stale and repetitive as a game can be. I mean, all you have is career and free skate. Just look at this main menu. I mean, this is just like really depressing. This already feels like a step back when compared to probably the last 4 games at least in the content department, and the overall feel of the game is much different. I can't exactly put my finger on why, but this game just feels like the overall physics and gameplay feel much more floaty and not in a good way. But full disclosure, actually the PS2 version of this game, and this came out on 360 and PS3, and these games are actually pretty different, and I didn't figure that out until I was actually like writing this video. So that seems like definitely an issue on my end. I probably should have played the better version, but maybe that's why the physics are bad. But I kind of looked into it, and apparently a lot of people don't like the physics to begin with, so I don't know if that's a PS2 thing. But this game is actually a mixture of the underground and pro skater format for progression. You have the open world levels where you complete random missions until you complete enough to move on to the next level, but each level has a set of classic objectives on top of the main objectives, which is a really nice callback to the original. I know how I talked about the 2-minute timer in the old games kind of got annoying sometimes, but having this in moderation, which is exactly what Project 8 does, is a little bit more digestible. So same old song and dance, you're making a skater here who's trying to just make it, but for whatever reason makes this disgusting squelch noise whenever you choose what face you want. Yeah, that was kind of also, to prove how like not much of a skater I am, and the reason I only play these games is because I like good video games, is that I had no idea Jason Lee was like any relevance to skateboarding. So when I saw him in this game, I was pretty surprised. I was like, what the fuck? Like, why is Dave from Alvin and the Chipmunks in this game? But then I looked into it, and I guess that's actually how he got his start in Hollywood and stuff. So that's on me for being a dumbass idiot. He's actually your mentor for the game, and I kind of like that. It's kind of funny just hearing a very familiar voice, so I was pretty all in on that. Anyways, this game isn't bad whatsoever. I appreciate new concepts like the nail a trick slow-mo flick mechanic thing, which is a lot how EA Skate does their game, and apparently this game came out before EA Skate, so it's kind of weird to see like such an obscure Tony Hawk game be the inspiration for EA Skate, which, you know, is like the biggest skateboard game out there. It's not Tony Hawk. But of all the games we've talked about so far, I think this is the first game that I would argue is forgetful and one you can definitely skip. Project 8 gets a C tier. Tony Hawk's Proving Ground feels like an indirect sequel to Project 8. With all the weird nuances to stand out from the other games, this one sort of takes an edgy approach. Kind of like Underground, you start out back in bleak Philly instead of New Jersey and work your way towards the inner city. And also like Project 8, I played this game on PS2 and it had next-gen version, so I kind of fucked that one up here too. And these games seem even more different from each other, but sorry, we're already here. We're talking about this one. The next-gen version has an open-world aesthetic like Project 8 did as well, but that was cut from the PS2 for hardware limitations. The PS2 version still tries to give the game an open world feel with all the level design because they're pretty large overall. And you also have tons of goals, a lot of which are relatively easy. And you have the same form of progression, just get enough skill points or whatever this little bar is, and then you get to the next level. There's also like the hardcore story, which is, again, the edgy part of this game. Kind of weird, honestly. The gameplay is basically the same when you have that nail a trick thing mechanic that, again, I wasn't crazy about, but I think they were trying to make that like the new thing moving forward. But one thing they did change that was a really big, just like, why the f did you do this, is the grind and manual bar. Before, you know, it's just a classic. There's an arrow on a bar and it moves, but now it like takes up your whole screen and it's kind of hard to see, honestly. I really hated this. This is a classic, if it ain't broken, don't fix it kind of thing, and this was really distracting. I did eventually get used to it, but does not mean I enjoyed it. It's just another average experience. I think they were just trying to rush something out on next-gen consoles, even though I played it on the PS2 version. It's forgettable. It's another C tier. Tony Hawk's Motion is another DS exclusive that requires the motion pack. That being said, I only own a 3DS, and that does not have the Game Boy cartridge like spot, and you can't put that in a 3DS, so I actually didn't play this game. But I don't think I need to tell you that this game is really bad. I looked at gameplay, which again is total cop-out, bitch made answer, so you can crucify me in the comments for not playing in this game. I tried to get it running in an emulator, but got an error code because it didn't detect the motion pack, which was kind of lame. But I'm giving this game an F tier. Sorry I didn't actually play it, but I don't want to waste my money on this bullshit. You know, I was too cheap to buy the motion pack for the Tony Hawk Motion game. I'm not too cheap to buy the Tony Hawk Ride controller. The year is 2009 and Tony Hawk games are fairly relevant, so a motion-controlled skateboard game with dedicated peripheral was inevitable. And thus, Tony Hawk Ride was born. I'm just going to go ahead and lump Tony Hawk Ride and Shred together. They came out a year between each other, but it's the same idea. They use the same exact controller, and the only difference between them is that Shred adds snowboarding into the mix. And both of these go down as some of the worst Tony Hawk games of all time. It's really hard to make a game built around motion controls and also be good, so I'll give them credit, but it's still really bad. It won't come to us as a surprise that the responsiveness is pretty terrible. I only play the mode where you're on rails the whole time, and trying to do even just a flip trick and like manual or a jump, anything, just it feels like you're going to do the opposite. Trying to do an ollie versus a manual feels impossible. I can never like consistently get one or the other when I'm trying to do one. And then the flip trick, I literally could not get this to work ever. So that was pretty frustrating. I played this game as a kid. One of my friends had it for his PS3, and we hated it back then. We hate it now still. And then you have Shred, which suffers all the same exact problems we just talked about and doesn't fix anything. It's still just unresponsiveness and terrible. I feel like this was almost going to be DLC for the game, and then they were just like, fuck it, let's just make its own game and create another controller, which is the same controller but just says Shred on it as far as I'm concerned. I also couldn't even get my controller to collaborate with this game, so that was pretty annoying. I did everything it told me to and it still wouldn't work, and these controllers are 100% compatible, so fuck that. These are both pretty terrible. Don't play them. They're both F tier. Pro Skater HD was the first attempt at a remake for a Tony Hawk franchise, which would become a reoccurring theme. Although we had seen a few deluxe editions or superior versions of older entries that I don't think are different enough to worth talking about, this is the first one that actually is, and it's still not worth talking about. This is a slap in the face to Tony Hawk fans because the game completely changed what was good about Pro Skater 1, i.e. the gameplay physics, which in turn affects the entire gameplay experience. They just turned this engine upside down on itself, and it just completely ruined the game entirely. And when you have a different engine and gameplay, but you're playing on the same old levels and stuff with no change to that, it does not like communicate very well with each other. Similar to Project 8, I can't really put my finger on why this game is bad. It just is. Everything about the way it feels just does not work. Anyways, devs will learn from their mistakes or neighboring studios for future remakes, because the only thing good about this game is the graphics, which is only a minute part about the actual game itself. This game is a D tier. Oh boy, here we are. It had been nearly 13 years since the last installment in the Pro Skater franchise, so when Pro Skater 5 got announced, people were pretty fucking excited. With countless spin-offs and experiments within that time period, seeing the game go back to its roots on the Xbox One and PS4 era of consoles, but unfortunately, this is the worst Tony Hawk game of all time. This is probably one of the biggest failures in gaming history when you factor in like how anticipated this game is versus how like much it delivered. You know, we've had examples, you know, Cyberpunk obviously had a terrible launch, but the game was still pretty good. You know, it was just buggy and whatnot. Starfield was pretty mid, even though I actually really liked that game. But, you know, compared to what people wanted from it, it wasn't where it was supposed to be, I guess. And this game, you know, people expected a lot, and then this is just like so terrible. First and foremost, the game is just super buggy, clunky, and unresponsive. Honestly, on the same wavelength as Tony Hawk Ride, and this is a game that doesn't even use motion controls. In turn, the game engine is just unpolished with weird physics that don't feel smooth at all. The level design is also really bland, repetitive, and offshoots of pre-existing levels in the franchise to make it feel extremely unoriginal. And I feel like I mentioned this at least one time per every video. I don't give a fuck about graphics, but for this game, the graphics are so terrible for 2015. This legit looks like it's on an iPad or like Xbox 360. Like, I think there are games on 360 that look way better than this. There's rumors that this game only exists to like preserve the IP of the Tony Hawk franchise, which doesn't make sense because the developers and I think even publishers of this game haven't developed a game since, and we got multiple games that have come out later and also aren't developed by them. So I don't know why that is. Regardless, this game does feel extremely rushed and just like not any type of love was put into this game. Like I said, this is hands down the worst game in the franchise and gets bonus failure points for being such an anticipated game that fell totally flat. F- ranking. We would go 5 years without a Tony Hawk game until we got Pro Skater 1 and 2 Remake in 2020. Like Pro Skater 5, people were pretty damn excited to get their hands on this game, as the only remake we'd seen so far had been a massive failure. And let me rip the band-aid off right now. This is one of the best examples of how to remake any video game ever. Pro Skater 1 and 2 has everything the original games has to offer, minus the whole, you know, Spider-Man and other licensing issues for custom skaters in their games. But on top of that, add a couple of new things that make the game feel even better than the original titles. One major addition to the game is reverts being added, which weren't in the original games. I talked about how big of a deal that was in Pro Skater 3 when it was introduced, and having these back on the original games on a fresh coat of paint is just like one of the best quality of life changes you can make. The best comparison to make this to is if you ever played Wind Waker HD when they added the Swift sail to the boat. That's basically adding reverts to this game. Just makes things much easier, kind of like, you know, something you didn't really need, but, you know, the new games have, and it's like, oh, why can't we just put this in the old game when we remake it? And that's exactly what they did, and it works very well. The beauty of this game is that Pro Skater 1 and 2 are already really good games, so I think that kind of carries this game. Just when you have a really good game to remake and you do the remake well, the original game is going to speak for itself, and that's what's going on here. Seeing this game and then realizing Pro Skater 1 HD was such a massive failure, it's like, dude, you really did not have to like try that hard. Because I don't really want them to change the game too much. I think reverts and then like, you know, some added bonus content, completionist bonus for this game. That's all there really is to it. Obviously, there's a fresh coat of paint, and this game is beautiful. I played it on my PC, and I mean, the graphics are just spectacular. Not that I give a fuck, but it's also just always a nice plus when that happens. The fresh coat of paint is breathtaking to see how good you can make an old game look by building it from the ground up. And I don't really have much else to say about this game other than this is probably the best Tony Hawk game we've had since like Underground 2 maybe. I think this is one everyone should play. I think, you know, playing the originals is great. This might and probably is a better way to experience those games. Definitely at least a very more accessible one. But I'm going bold. Pro Skater 1 and 2 gets an S tier, which is better than what I ranked both the original games. I talked about how Pro Skater 5 was the most anticipated game in the franchise, but 3 and 4 has come surprisingly close. I mean, the moments leading up to this in the last month or two was kind of like everyone was on the edge of their seat. They were really excited about this, probably because they saw how good 1 and 2 was. And that's actually the whole reason I'm making this video, is because I saw this coming out and I was like, fuck it, we're gonna play every one of them. So it's 2 classic games in one package with a complete and beautiful overhaul to the graphics, more refined controls, and even added bonus content. What's not to love? While most of this is true for Pro Skater 3, it's Pro Skater 4 where I have some serious issues with this game. There was a bold decision to remove the open worldish levels and simplify Pro Skater 4 to the whole 2-minute timer format that we had in 1 through 3. And in case you forgot, that was my whole jam with this game, was they didn't do that in Pro Skater 4. It was its own thing, you know, open world, talk to people kind of thing. Not really open world, but more open world compared to 1 through 3. That seems like a preferential thing, but when you consider that they didn't rework any of the levels to fit this vibe, it doesn't really work out well. Kind of like Pro Skater HD, where, you know, the physics were changed, but the levels weren't, so it didn't really communicate well. But now you have like some goals returning, but a lot of goals are not here. And then you have like this one really pisses me off, is that the zoo level got reworked into a competition stage. I don't know about you, but I was fully ready to get shit on by an elephant in 4K, but that's not possible in this game. Yeah, I don't know. It just really did not sit well with me. I know I'm not alone on this, but that was just like, I mean, just a really interesting decision that I still can't wrap my head around. Those levels are empty. There's no NPCs like there was before. It's just that same level, but it just has a ghost town vibe to it. Pro Skater 3, on the other hand, is much more true to its roots, which is good to see that. And since I played these games in order, I played Pro Skater 3 and was like, wow, this is a really good remake. You know, it's like 1 and 2 all over again. I mean, maybe they announced this ahead of time, but I knew nothing about this game going into it. I loaded up Pro Skater 4 and saw a timer, and I was like, what the fuck is this? One other notable difference that I think is objectively bad is the missing soundtrack. There are some songs that returned, and I know a lot can happen in 20 years with licensing and musicians and the rights to their music. You know what I mean? It is just an absolute cluster disaster, but there are tons of missing songs here, like way too many that's like acceptable. Again, maybe it's beyond their control, I can totally see that, but it definitely took away from it. Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, Tony Hawk games in general, those games, like the soundtracks are synonymous with the game, so it's kind of part of the experience in my opinion. Obviously, to counteract this, they add new songs, and I'd be lying if I wasn't saying I enjoyed the ADHD, just like hypeness of 100 gecs playing while I'm playing these games. I can get down with that shit any day, but then when I'm missing songs like Blitzkrieg Bop, I mean, that's just like borderline unacceptable. On the other hand, you have bonus content like we said before. There's a multiplayer mode where you and whoever else can run combos together. Then there's the park editor, which is honestly pretty mind-boggling what you can do here. There's a whole browser. You can play other people's content, which in theory is just unlimited like replayability. It sounds like I've been bitching a lot, which I have, but I'll give them credit. That is a really good change to this game, and you know, in the engine and everything, it's just a really good addition to this. And in true Tony Hawk fashion, there are tons of completionist bonus, arguably more than we've seen in any other game. So again, good on them in that regard. Overall, the gameplay is fine when it comes to doing tricks and exploring, and this game is also on Game Pass for Xbox and PC, so if you have those subscriptions, you definitely like should play this. But I think this is a $50 or even $60 game, and I'd feel kind of cheated if I spent that kind of money on this. You got to preserve the classics somehow, and the way they did Pro Skater 4 in this game was just not it. Maybe for a new player, it's fine, and it probably is, but for a returning player who wants to, you know, experience that again, like, you're just not going to. Also, we knew this was coming, but with Disney big dicking every IP out there, you know, there's no Darth Maul, there's no Wolverine, there's no Jango Fett, so that kind of sucks too, but I'll give them a break on that one. That one's like totally beyond their control. The whole music thing, I think, you know, I again don't know how it works, but I think if they paid enough money, which I'm sure they have a lot of, they could have got those songs back and licensed, so kind of lame there. But anyways, enough of the bitching. I'm gonna give this a C tier, which really makes me sad to give it this rank, especially when you go from Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 being such a good remake, and then seeing this just kind of be like a little underwhelming. Just is sad more than anything. But anyways, here's my ranking. Here's the final list. Go ahead and let me know which ones you agree with, which ones you don't, because I know you hate that one here. You fucking hate that one. Also, this thing, like, my arm's about to fall off. This shit's way heavier than it looks, so maybe consider subscribing for the arm day I just gave you all. And if you want to hear me talk about every Grand Theft Auto game or every Lord of the Rings game, click on screen now. And if you liked, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. And thank you so much for watching.